This is Reworking Work, a video series from Quartz where we go deep with senior executives on the inner workings of their companies. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Reworking Work. I'm Anna Oakes, the editor of Quartz at Work, and we're joined today by Gulliver Swenson. Gulliver, thanks for joining.
Yeah, of course, Anna. Thanks for having me. So, as you said, Gulliver Swenson. I am the Chief People Officer at Assurance IQ. My first job was paper route delivering the Seattle Times. So I am a native Northwesterner, and I came to the Chief People Officer role by way of 15 years in the practice of law and private practice, a couple years as the Chief Legal Officer at Assurance, and then a bright new opportunity to lead our people function here.
Oh, that's so exciting. We're going to talk about something fun that you've been doing to gather your hybrid workers soon. So that's our focus today. But why don't we start out with Gulliver, just like sort of a grounding area. I find that values, mission, vision can certainly do that. For Assurance, it's efficient innovation and humble collaboration. Those are some of the North Stars that you're using. So tell me what that means when it comes to your culture.
Yeah, of course. So we have entered into this space that is the insurance marketplace, where there has been a lot of the same players for a long time, and there's been a lack of disruption, and there's been a lack of technology. And so when we took on this mission of sort of helping, improving, and protecting the lives of the consumers that we touch, we realized we had to do something in a different way. And this required sort of this combination of art and science. The science being the data science that is behind it, and the art being the art of the insurance agent and and sort of the delivery and that relationship with the consumer. And we realized we weren't going to be able to do something different if we just said, hey, here's the way it's always been done, let's do it slightly better, or let's make some modern improvements. And so from that perspective, we wanted to run a really, really flat organization. We wanted the best ideas to win out. We wanted to create a culture where at the end of a brainstorming session, you forgot whose idea it was originally, because there were so many sort of building blocks on top of it that led to the great result. And to do so, like it required our leaders and it required our employees to just approach everything with this layer of humility, because that's how that ideation happens, right? That's where that innovation comes from, is everyone coming and being curious, everyone coming and thinking like, there's something different here we can do. There's something that we can solve. And then there was also this recognition that to do so, it was this intersect between sort of technology and insurance that hadn't really overlapped in many ways before. And so that's where the collaboration part came in. And so the idea being like, if we can all humbly come to a conversation, have a focus on collaboration, like the outcome of that's going to be that innovation. And we're technology companies. Let's do it efficiently. And so all those things really came together to, be the outcome from those great meetings, those great whiteboarding sessions. And we looked at designing our cultural values. It was those moments and those successes that really defined us and have continued to be part of who we are.
Yeah, and I would think that also had a big play in your journey with remote or hybrid work, right? I think every company has their own origin story there. What is Assurance's?
Yeah, so we were sort of in a very interesting place as a company when the pandemic hit, and we had been set up in many ways for a hybrid workplace. So we had a Seattle headquarters. But we had a second decent sized office in Toronto. And we also had a number of our employees and key employees who worked remotely as is. So our current CEO, Allison Arzeno, she was working in California at first, in Atlanta, so she would come out and work. And we found a way to sort of like balance this aspect of having people in office and out of office as is coming into the pandemic. And then we'd also been doing a build out for a new space on a long-term lease in Seattle. And we had been thinking about it from how are we going to do this in a way that is very inviting to our out-of-town guests? How are we going to build space that says, this is a great place to come and do the work that needs to take place in person. And we'd always seen that work as that collaborative work, right? It was always still that that expectation that when you were going to do that cross-functional work, when you were going to do that work that required the trust building, when you're going to do the work that sort of required the whiteboarding and required that that blank space, the pauses that allow the ideas to come, that we want our space to represent that. So we focused on having all of our common space be the best spaces in the office. Like our large kitchen is in our sort of northwest corner, which has this great view of Puget Sound and the mountains. It's a great place to come and meet your coworkers. All of our desks are set up as hoteling desks. All of our every space has a sort of telephone booth, or a small conference room, or a mid-sized conference room, or a large conference room. There's just all of these interesting little nooks and crannies and corners around the office that are meant for people to come together. And so we were set up already well from that perspective. And then the other sort of complicating factor that was part of our origin story was just we experienced massive growth as a company in the kind of 2019 to 2022 period. So we were acquired in 2019 and had about 120 employees at that point. And now our core group of employees is right around 500. And we've also added a remote W-2 insurance agent workforce, which is about another 1,000 to 1,200 to 1,500 agents, depending on the time of the year. So really figuring out how do we build something with that workforce that now, since it was grown over the pandemic, really is a primarily remote workforce. How do we build something that allows that trust to be developed between these remote teams? How do we build something that allows that cross-functional work to be successful? It's really come together around our space and around this belief that that sort of this hybrid environment can work for us, where we can focus on what does it look like to be in person, what's important to do in person, what's kind of stuff that needs to happen in person, and what are the things that we can accomplish sort of async or over Slack or not in person.
That's great. So you've been at this, and I know, Gulliver, from chatting with you, that you've been at this for 9 months. So you've had a little bit of time to practice this. What happens during what we're entering now? We're introing this to our listeners, the Seattle weeks. What happens during Seattle weeks that pulls all this together?
Yeah. So Seattle weeks are our effort to say we want to be together. There were all of these there were all of these recognitions that were happening as we were building out our teams, and my team's a great example of this. So there was a point with my team where the people team had 40 employees, and they were in 32 different states, and they'd all been hired within, let's say, the last 15 months or so. And so it was this really new team that didn't have the relationship history and thus didn't have the trust. And what happens is you show up to a new job and you're like, I trust my coworkers. I like this place. It feels right. It feels good. But without the trust, those 1 or 2 moments, the trust gets burned, and then you have this gap, right? And I think we're a strong believer that the trust in your coworkers, the trust in your employer, the trust in your mission is the foundation of the workers having the will to really kind of do the great work that they love to do. And in this instance, we brought the entirety of the people team into Seattle, and I could see sort of in a moment, right, in the first 15 seconds of eye-to-eye contact and a hug or a handshake, there was more trust built than you could build over hours of a phone call, or multiple Zooms, or how many ever sort of virtual events that you wanted to try and have that would be those culture building events. So we realized that there were these key components that would happen if we brought our employees together, and we were also having these. Prior to sort of developing this idea of Seattle Weeks, we were having these, sort of randomized people coming to Seattle. So there would be, 15 people coming because the marketing team was going to do X, Y, and Z. And then a week later, there would be 10 people coming from Toronto, and they'd come to the office and be like, God, where is everybody? Like, it feels like this is a great office. It's beautiful. It's a place that's built for collaboration, but there's no one here. And our local employees, our perspective was like, come in when you want to come in. We'd love to have you come in. There's free lunch on Wednesdays, like there, more of the carrot than the stick. And they would do the same. They would come in on Tuesday, but their coworkers wouldn't be here because their coworker was coming in on a Wednesday, or it was more comfortable to come in on a Friday or whatever it was. And so we realized that like we were having enough people over the course of the month come in to make something special, but they were just sort of coming in every other day, and it wasn't aligning. And so we just sort of said, like, let's get everyone in on the same week. Let's focus on making sure that our Seattle employees are here that week, and let's focus on making sure that that if we're having on-sites, that if we're having teams come in, they're coming in that week. And so what's happened is this sort of like beautiful build of a full office, right? So for 1 week a month, we get 180 people in here, and you get that buzz, right? You get that feeling of like, I work at a place with great people that I get to see, that I get to put my eyes on, that I get to build those personal relationships with. It's not just this transactional Zoom conversation. It's something deeper than that. And it's actually for sort of the first time that I can remember since like we were back in the office pre-pandemic, it started to create some of those like FOMO experiences where other employees are like, oh God, I wish I was there this week. It looks amazing to be in office. And like it's having that impact of really creating this place where people want to come. And when they want to come, they show up with that attitude of like openness, that attitude of curiosity, that attitude of trying to meet and engage and build relationships with their coworkers, which again is like so important to our success.
And there's probably been a lot of positive things that you can point to, Gulliver. I'm curious what happens in the off weeks then. How do you think bringing them together for that magical week affects the other 3 weeks of the month?
Yeah, so it honestly it's the foundation for the rest of the time, right? And I spoke a little bit about that that trust aspect, but there's also like there's a knowledge gain that's so critical to these weeks. So the work that we focus on when we're in person and connected during the Seattle weeks is often work that falls into the categories of like open houses on kind of technology products, or the deep dives into projects. And so like we'll have a project that's a cross-functional project that's going to involve our FP&A team on our finance, our omni-channel marketing team, our product development team, other aspects of our technology team. And by virtue of them all coming together for that week, it really fills them up with understanding of where everyone else sits, and sort of actions to take that gets us to sort of that next point. And it's those moments that provide the clarity, that provide the understanding, that are the framework and the sort of the groundwork for that next work to happen. So that's one critical element of it. It's also been really beneficial for our Seattle population, right? So for the workers that and the employees that haven't been coming in on on every week, they'll come in during a Seattle week and they'll get a little bit of a buzz, they'll get a little bit of feeling of like, oh, this is fun. So it really helps with kind of local population and them recognizing that spending time with their coworkers is great. And there's actually this feeling of like, oh, it's actually fun to be part of a smaller group too, right? So our marketing team comes in on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and there's a little marketing buzz on our 35th floor where like they've caught a little of the fever from being in an office. And it's that sort of FOMO that then kind of matriculates into this behavior on a week-to-week basis, which is super fun. So it's really foundational to like both the project-based work and the sort of the team culture-based work. And it serves as kind of that tie back that you can always sort of like, oh, we got a Seattle week coming up. Oh, we got a Seattle week coming up. And it's sort of like, it fills the gaps in between in a nice way.
Yeah, it's really great. I can just see the opportunity for connection happening and spurring in there, so that when they're together in their Seattle weeks, they're coordinating their non-Seattle weeks to be even more effective as well. And so really
Completely.
the best of both worlds.
Yeah. So, it's those, as I said, those sort of serve as these like grounding points. And we've asked our leaders to think about like, what is the type of work that really benefits from being in person? What is the type of sort of the work that will, if we do it in person, will empower those individuals and those teams that are now going back out into those sort of like remote worlds where they're not as connected, where the connections are going to be more transactional, where the work is going to be more async. Like, how do you keep on building that in a way where like the time together is really supportive of that time apart?
Yeah, so let's talk about having this commitment to hybrid and having a physical office, right, where people can come. How do you merge the physical office and the remote environment together?
So like, as I said, like we were like set up from just like a cultural and a tool perspective, right? Like we were commonly doing things async over Zoom, through Confluence, through Slack, as a company already. We do a ton of work in Confluence, and Confluence serves as a place where again we see our culture come through. So like getting back to the idea of having a flat, curious, collaborative culture. What we try and do on Confluence is really have that be a space where there's clarity as to what others are working on. So we'll have weekly specs, which are the sort of the specifics of projects that are going on, and it's a space where all employees will go who are curious and comment and ask questions and challenge in the way that you can challenge when you have trusting relationships built with your coworkers. And so there's those spaces that sort of always exist as our baselines, that are the channels of communication, that are the channels of connectivity. And then there's just like there's this general recognition that we have to have as a company, which is like, we accept the whole person, right? We accept that your schedule and the way that you work, and the way that you show up may be different. So like, even speaking about these Seattle weeks, the Seattle weeks can be really hard for some people, right? So the first Seattle week I participated in, when my team showed up, like I got off the elevator, I showed up in the kitchen. The first person I saw was someone I've been working with for a year or so, hadn't seen in person. Like, big hug, met her. The second person, I immediately forgot her name, even though I've been working with her for 6 or 9 months, had tons of Zoom meetings, and then I'm embarrassed and I'm like slightly overwhelmed. And I literally went and hid in our CEO's office. I was like, oh my God, this is overwhelming, right? And so part of our balance is really to recognize like that everyone doesn't connect in the same way, and how do we produce those opportunities to allow people to connect in different ways. And while Seattle weeks are great, like we don't want them to be on 100% of the time. Like there's got to be breaks, there's got to be gaps. Every night's not a social night, right? Like so that's one way of thinking about, but then we think about that also in terms of the way that we have people connecting sort of offline, or we have people connecting like on Confluence or through Slack. And there's an approach that's a recognition around like empowering your employees to connect in the way that they feel comfortable, as long as it is building those connections, as long as it is building that trust. And like, most employees will come to Seattle once or twice a year for Seattle week. So like that's 6 days out of 365 or 7 days out of 365. Like there's a lot of other days in there where we have to figure out, how do we empower our employees? How do we get that push from our employees that says like, I feel empowered, I feel like I'm part of something. And a lot of that comes to like, how are we creating an environment where they feel like they're being met where they need to be met, where there's opportunities for them to be successful in the way that they communicate and connect with their coworkers. So like, it's really like this, that deep understanding that we're here for you. We're here to accept you as a whole person, recognizing that like, you may have a 3-hour period in the middle of the day where you got to pick up kids from school and you got to get stuff going for dinner, and then you're going to pop back on from 6 to 8. But that allows you to jump into that confluence and comment in that confluence, because that's something you can do async. And so really taking our employees where they are and recognizing that the Seattle weeks are part of the solution and part of an approach, but that there's so much more that goes on in terms of how do we connect with our employees that allows them to kind of feel like they're part of something, feel like they're part of a team, feel like they're a culture of sort of connectivity and trust.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I've said before, and I still believe this is true, it's a lot easier to manage an all remote or all in-person workforce. Hybrid comes with its own set of complications and intentions that you must do. So I'm curious, Gulliver, especially as you were talking sort of the individual experience of these Seattle weeks, and this hybrid work. What advice do you have for the individual out there who's listening, and maybe they're not as part of such a progressive organization who's pulling them together and gathering intentionally? What advice would you have for them?
Yeah. So for me, like there was this, as a leader and as a newer leader of the people team, there was this sort of aha moment I had around the separation between kind of the difference between getting the work done and really appreciating the person who's doing the work. And I know a lot of employers will talk about bringing your best self to work, and how we empower someone to bring their best self to work. And I think that's meaningful, and I think that's an approach. But as we sort of talked about, like, we're here for you, like we're here for that whole person, and we recognize, like, in today's day and age, like life is hard. Like this is complex. And so I think, like, just like a baseline recognition that work is part of the equation of the human that makes all of this stuff like pretty complicated, and to ask that employee to disconnect their personal life from their work life, and to not show up and sometimes just have a hard day, and sometimes not be able to be their best selves. Like, that's okay. And we focus a ton on what it looks like to be vulnerable as leaders. And that's been a big piece for us, right? It's been being fallible. Like it started with this, it started more like with a business perspective on failing fast and being okay. Like that's like, you read a startup book, it's going to talk about failing fast, right? Failing fast allows you to, to efficiently innovate. Those two things are connected, right? Like, let's test and learn, let's fail, let's get better, and like we move forward, right? There's a personal element to that too. It's easy to say that, but it's harder to do that in a work environment where you feel like you're going to be judged for your failure. And so as leaders, it's really incumbent upon us to show that vulnerability, to admit our failures, to identify places that we struggle, to be personal, and to be able to connect. And that's just being a human, right? That's showing up to the workplace and honestly bringing yourself to that workplace and recognizing that the person on the other end of the Zoom call is also a human with their unique interests and unique issues. And so for us, it's been like the personalization of the employee. Like it's the de-widgeting of our workforce. Like, these aren't interchangeable pieces. It's not one person in one role that's in a salary band and you can just replace them with another person in the same role with the same salary band, right? It's understanding the person. It's allowing there to be vulnerability. It's allowing them to bring themselves to work in a way that they feel comfortable with. And I think that's the direction of the modern day workforce. So, my plug is to get on board now with that, and to recognize the sort of the human nature of the individuals that you work with, and to appreciate sort of that diversity that everyone brings to the workforce, and let that be a strength as opposed to being something that you're trying to sort of hide or push away from, or shift the focus from, so you can just focus on kind of the results of the day-to-day.
Love that. And let's wrap with some advice to the organizations, because just like there's the individual out there, somebody might be listening to this and want to adopt aspects of what we've talked about today. They may not be ready to like jump in to a whole week of everybody coming into the office, but they want to borrow some of these ideas. What can a company do to be intentional with connection, Gulliver?
Yeah. So number one, I think, is like is just to focus on whether you've made it to the point of trust, right? So for us, we've always thought that trust of your employer, trust of your coworkers, trust of your department, trust of your manager, that those are like sort of like the threshold items that allow employees to be successful. So find ways to measure that. Through engagement surveys, through stay interviews, through through any sort of one-on-one, skip levels, connectivity, whatever it may be. See if you have an organization that trusts you, and let that be that foundational element. That's doable, right? And that's what these sale weeks came out of. That's what the sort of the spend on travel came from, was our belief that we had to build that trust and we had to build those relationships in a way that would allow people to be successful. And I think there's got to be also a recognition, and we touched on this a little bit, that when you are working with your employees, that it can't always be work, right? And that there's got to be some balance in terms of the building of those personal connections. So we'll do some just a fair amount of fun exercises throughout the course of the year, where we try and focus on things that aren't work related. And we try and find those strengths and those interests of our employees and highlight those and amplify those. So like, if we've got people that are good at public speaking and want to, get better, they're hosting our all hands. If we've got someone who's, an artist or a singer, we're using their cartoons or their voice in something that we're doing. We are not only saying like we want to care about you as a person and we want you to be able to show up and be who you are, but we're amplifying the individual aspects of our individuals in ways that say like we care about this and this matters to us because it does. So like those are things that are like pretty easy to do in terms of starting to build some of that feeling and some of those personal connections that I think allow organizations to be successful. I think the other thing that was a big realization for us, and we sort of touched on this, is like that recognition, especially in this remote world, of how people kind of have different needs in terms of how they need to show up and how they need to communicate. And those communication tools that we use, so Slack, Confluence, in person, all hands, newsletters, emails, like those all are intentional and have a purpose. And so it's not that we just pick up a new platform and drop it into like our employee group and say, have fun. We're really thoughtful about how we use them. And we're really thoughtful about the expectations we set around intentionality of the things that happen on Confluence, about the channels that we have on Slack, about, kind of the expectations around how we use those things. So they do empower those employees to be involved, to feel like that they're making an impact, to feel like they're making a difference. So those have all been things that I would say like are takeaways from this that are pretty easy for others to take away from our work.
Lots of great ideas to rework work, Gulliver. That's what we want. So
Yeah, of
really,
course.
I was pulling the onion and the layers of the onion back and talking about Seattle Weeks with you. And let's stay in touch with how this works out and how it grows in your organization for sure.
Awesome, Anna. Well, certainly appreciate the opportunity to connect with you and to share what we're doing out here in Seattle.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody. Peace and progress.